What's up, guys? I'm coming at you from Chongqing, and today I will be joined by Robbie Barwick, Research Director of the Australian Citizens Party. Those of you who have been with my channel for a while know exactly who he is. And we're going to be talking about the Uyghur genocide narrative. What happened to it? Why does it seem like it fizzled out? Kind of reflecting on the reasons this narrative has lost traction and reconcile how some of these kind of strange narratives can gain a foothold. Just one quick note before I get into that. You may see that in some of my videos, I switch between some travel vlogs and also commentary like this. And the reason is I think that if I'm sitting here in my studio all the time telling you about what's wrong with the anti-China propaganda, rather than actually going out and showing you what China's actually like, I've been living here for 16 years, I feel like it's a little bit of a lost opportunity. So you may see more of that being mixed in. So just in case you feel a little bit odd when you say, hey, Daniel's now covering an MMA fight, what's going on here? Just kind of showing you what everyday people do here. But without further ado, let's bring Robbie in and speak about our topic at hand here. Robbie, how you doing?
Excellent, Daniel. How are you?
Good. I'm good. So the Uyghur narrative seems to be kind of fizzling out, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. About that, I guess you could only maintain a genocide narrative without any actual evidence for a certain period of time. But I think there's a lot more going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Just the idea of a genocide without any bodies. I was confronted with this a couple of years ago when a journalist attacked me because I questioned Vicky Xu in public about her claims. And when the journalist called me up to question me about this, he referred to mass graves in Xinjiang. And I had to pull him up and say, hang on, you obviously don't know this subject very well. This is a genocide without any mass graves. He just assumed that if the US government had called this genocide, there must be mass graves. And of course there aren't. And so if you take those kind of aspects of a genocide away, what have you got left with? And the big contrast that I think now people have to look at is, here's a mass murder event in front of our eyes in Gaza. How do you compare the two? Americans are calling that the right for self-defense, and they're sticking with their genocide narrative in Xinjiang, but no one's buying it anymore.
That's exactly it. I think the contrast is a really big piece of that, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But I want to kind of look at what is happening, though, now that people who invested so much time in pushing this narrative see it falling apart before their eyes, now that people realize what a genocide looks like when it's actually happening. Obviously, I mean, so I've been to Xinjiang now, I think 3 or 4 times, and I haven't announced it yet, but I might be doing something. Some other people know that I'm in the, I do brew pubs and different things like that. So I might be doing something in Xinjiang, but I'm not going to talk about it yet because we're putting a bid in today on that. So I'm not going to mention it other than that. But what I want to say is going to Xinjiang and seeing it for yourself is a really important thing too, because obviously when you really say, well, there are no mass graves, and they say, oh, well, they're eradicating the language, they're eradicating the culture, and you go there, you can actually see for yourself, this is absolutely not true. There's not even the slightest attempt to do this.
Well, so the latest claim I saw is, they're banning Uyghur men from wearing their traditional hats. Oh. And I must have seen a million photos of those hats in the last few years.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. The second last or third last time I went to Xinjiang, somebody gifted me, a local friend there gifted me one of them. I have it here at home.
You took the last one. You took the last one.
No, that was the last one. That was the last one. But no, on the topic of actually going there, I think the propagandists know this. So if you take a look at what's going on, they're actually suggesting that they ban American citizens from being able to go to Xinjiang. I mean, this is because the consequences of going there and seeing it yourself are obvious.
Look, this is a theme now, actually, Daniel, in American politics, that it's so dependent on Americans being insular and not really knowing anything about what happens outside their own country, that the whole edifice of their propaganda depends on that ignorance. And so I'm thinking, now that you've shown that image, I'm thinking of this thing I saw yesterday where politicians like Mitt Romney admitted that we've got to ban TikTok because TikTok is giving people a different narrative on Gaza. He actually said that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Explicit. And you've got these American congressmen saying we have to ban people from going to Xinjiang because they don't say this, but this is actually what the truth is. They may see that we're lying if they go to Xinjiang. And there's even a British vlogging couple have just put up a pretty big video where they went to Xinjiang nervously, expecting to see to encounter trouble. Instead, they found something very different than they expected. And that's going to be everyone's experience if they get to go.
Right, right. No, for sure, for sure. I think one of the other things too, we're going to skip through a few different topics here. One of the other things too that was really eye-opening for people as they see this unfolding, what's unfolding in Israel happening to the Palestinians, is Uyghur groups that are funded by the U.S. came out to actually support Israel. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, what is happening to the Palestinian people is exactly what you wanted people to believe were happening to the Uyghurs. And they're also Muslim. If that were the case, and you weren't just this tool of U.S. government propaganda, why are you not standing with them? And I want to show you some examples of that. We have one here. We hope that meetings can be arranged with Israel's government and parliament to foster friendship and cooperation between East Turkestan and Israel. I believe we can learn a great deal from the Jewish experience and their endeavors to regain their homeland and maintain Israel's independence. They look at what Israel is doing as a model for what they want to accomplish in Xinjiang. We have
to regain their homeland by displacing the Muslim inhabitants, indigenous people of the land.
Right. Yeah. And it's not, there were other articles before, and I've shared it in my previous videos, where there were a lot of Uyghur separatists who looked to Israel and Zionism as a model for what they wanted to accomplish. And Arslan Hidayat, who we're going to talk about later, even specifically told me in an exchange that they would expel all other non-Turkic ethnic minorities from Xinjiang, including Mongols, who have been there even longer than Uyghurs in many of those parts. So I think people are starting to, especially when you see this, like, how do you reconcile this? We have, here, after the attack, the World Uyghur Congress strongly condemns the horrific attacks by Hamas against Israel civilians and is deeply concerned about the prospect of escalation and further loss of lives. So all of the language is basically supportive of Israel and not really digging into the Palestinian issue. They kind of want to stay away from that for good reasons.
Well, I can't comment on the sincerity of their faith as Muslims, except to say, of course, that one of the reasons that the Muslim religion is even an issue in Xinjiang is because there was a genuine problem with Muslim extremism that had led to many terrorist attacks that the Chinese government had to address. And these same groups either deny it or are apologists for it, for the terrorist attacks that happened in Xinjiang. But what those tweets and those messages tell me, when the Washington-based Uyghur groups are being so pro-Israel in their messaging, I suspect there's at least an element where they've done a deal with the devil. They know their entire existence is at the pleasure of the United States government. And the United States government prioritizes Israel above all else. And they wouldn't go very well in Washington if they became if they criticized Israel, even in the context of what's happening now, because they're actually nothing organizations. They're not genuine grassroots Uyghur organizations. They are Washington-based fronts, and they're now exposing that is the truth about them through these messages that they've put out post in the context of the current current conflict over there.
Right, and that actually ties in perfectly with the next person I wanted to use as an example. We have, let's see here. We have this activist. Oh, I don't have a screenshot of her profile. Let me see here. No, I don't. I seem to have forgotten to upload that one. Let me see if I can grab it now. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So this is an activist who is working for this Uyghur project.
Yeah.
Right. Julie Millsap. And if you take a look at how her group is funded, it started from the NED, basically a front, what a lot of people call as a front for the CIA. Actually, even their own founder called it that.
Yep.
And they've received, over $1 million in funding. Now, so these kinds of people, the key here is she is a human rights activist working for a U.S. government-funded human rights organization who has actually been specifically told to tone down her criticisms of Israeli human rights abuses. She even admitted it right here. I'm not anti-Palestine. In fact, I've been asked before to tone down criticisms of the state of Israel. She's saying it directly. She's admitted that this is, so basically they're not paid to care about human rights abuses. They are paid to curate specific narratives, make up something over here, deflect from something over here. So when she does things like this, she shows up with her baby at the Chinese embassy with this kind of protesting. I mean, she's paid for these kinds of performances.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's completely inauthentic.
It's the Tillerson memo, the famous Tillerson memo. When Rex Tillerson became Secretary of State in 2017, he had been the CEO of Exxon. Right, so he had been someone who had done business with the Russian government, with the Chinese government, etc. He was Trump's choice to Secretary of State, and you can go online and read it, look it up. The Tillerson memo. Politico had an article about it, and they linked to it, and it's the State Department officials, the boffins, sat him down and said to him, "Here's what you need to know about human rights. We use human rights selectively. We use them against our adversaries, not our allies. It's that simple. It's a weapon." That's all. It serves that purpose. We use it as a weapon, and that's why you see the hypocrisy, because there's nothing genuine about the intent. I'm sure there are many Americans, and especially Americans of yesteryear, who helped found the United Nations and draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, who were, since especially in the post-World War II era, there was probably a lot of sincerity. But the way it's wielded today is nothing more than a weapon. It's completely cynical, and that's why the hypocrisy.
Right. Yeah. And it's not only a matter of paying attention to human rights abuses elsewhere, but it's also about manufacturing them. Saying that there's something happening there that's not, which is the case here. Actually, one last thing with Julie, because it's funny. I had some exchanges with her before. People can pause this if they want. I won't go through the whole thing. I don't know. I don't know if you saw this. It's basically when she was saying she was mistaken as a Uyghur at the airport. I'm like, well, because they thought she was a Uyghur fleeing or something along the lines of that. And I said, well, how do they know that? She said, well, I had my passport out at the airport and they knew I was leaving. I said, your passport, you're an American passport. That's a blue passport. How can they mistake it as that? And the case kind of all fell apart. There's many times she's been called out for this. But this was one of the more entertaining ones. But the point is you need to find people that are this comfortable with lying if you're expecting them to manufacture an artificial genocide like this. And this is exactly what you'll see over and over again. But now,
one of the reasons they're so sloppy with their lying is because they're used to their target audience being, frankly, gullible people in the West, especially Americans and Brits and whatever, who the prejudice is already there. So they swallow this stuff quite easily. The problem they have is, I always quote Kishore Mahbubani, the former Singaporean ambassador to the United Nations, who goes around doing quite good speeches about China, etc., and these tensions. He puts it at about 85% of the world is now looking at the world very differently the way the United States wants them to, and those are the people who, when it doesn't take much to point out what you've just pointed out, that they can see the truth of that themselves, and that kind of propaganda, sloppy propaganda, isn't fooling any of them anymore, if it ever did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Yeah. There's a lot of people out there who already had confirmation bias, which perhaps was also manufactured with some of the same things. And they were just looking for things to continually feed that confirmation bias. They wouldn't actually go in and ask questions like this of somebody like Julie and say, hang on a second, this doesn't make sense. This is an absolute lie. And the result is now, especially with people questioning mainstream narratives, because they can see how hard mainstream narratives are trying to push this. Did you see a thumbs up coming in the screen here? I don't know how that came up here.
Yeah, and you just froze.
Oh, okay. Anyway, yeah. Anyways, yeah.
So someone likes
someone. But I mean, they can see how hard this is being pushed. People really want the public to believe that Israel is on the right side here. Israel is, when they're slaughtering children, it's an unfortunate reality that this is something they've got to do. And so I think people are willing to take a step back. My kind of circle of friends and people who were following me from the beginning, the wake-up moment for us were the Hong Kong protests. If you actually knew something about what happened in Hong Kong and you saw how Western media was portraying it, that became a wake-up moment for us where we started questioning all kinds of narratives after that. I think that's what's going to happen here too. And one of the results of this, for now, at least, is, you can see Adrian Zenz here kind of panicking as well, saying that everybody here is kind of now supporting the Palestinians and not the Uyghurs. But once again, it's because you actually see what a genocide with actual evidence looks like.
And without being superficial, without wanting to sound superficial, having no body count versus what, 35,000 dead people now in 7 months, 15,000 of them children, and one of those is called Israel's right to defend itself, and the other one is called Chinese genocide. But the genocide one doesn't have a body count, and the other one does. It's fairly elementary, right? There's something really, really wrong with this picture. So Adrian Zenz would like us to think that, there's a lot more complex things going on that we need to understand about why Xinjiang is actually genocide, etc. But what I find remarkable in this context is the fact that the same Adrian Zenz, who more than anybody else, we would say manufactured this genocide narrative. Now, he was clearly the point person to do it. Right, he was working. He's basically working for the US government propaganda machine to do this, but he manufactured this narrative. It turns out, because I was tipped off to this by Max Blumenthal back in 2019. Max Blumenthal confronted Adrian Zenz at an event in Washington, DC, over a book that Adrian Zenz had written. Now, full disclaimer, I relate to this subject a bit because I was raised in the kind of churches who believe the things that Adrian Zenz believes. And what Max Blumenthal was pointing out is Adrian Zenz is a religious fundamentalist who wrote a book about the end times. And he really showed how very religious he is in a way that doesn't really fit with someone that you would consider an impartial expert on anthropology or whatever he's supposed to be, and an impartial voice on China and the Uyghurs. And so Max confronted Adrian Zenz about this, and it made me actually, Adrian Zenz's answer made me want to look at his book. And so I've actually done that. But do we want to play the clip of that?
Yeah, let me pull that up now.
I have a question for Adrian Zenz. Are you the author of Worthy, the same Adrian Zenz who authored Worthy to Escape, Why All Believers Will Not Be Raptured Before the Tribulation?
All right, would you mind introducing?
And that's, I just wanted to confirm that before going further. Is that correct that you authored that book?
We are asking people to introduce themselves.
My name is Max Blumenthal.
Thank you, and then we'll take the next
well, my question, if you are the author of that book, is that you, in that book, call for spiritual spanking of children. You refer to gender equality as a satanic campaign. You speak out against hate crime legislation, and you speak out against tolerance thinking, blaming it on the leopard-like power behind the Antichrist. I was wondering how those views influence your work on China, a country that officially restricts apocalypticist evangelical religions like those expressed in that book.
Yes, thank you for this question. I do have a diverse background, and I have personal convictions, which I do not believe are inconsistent with my research. I do not support China's authoritarian methods in any way, and I do believe that there's a God who is bringing judgment in different forms. The end times is a very complex topic, a very fascinating topic, and I think very relevant. And I think it's good to live aware of that. Otherwise, I think it would be necessary to further contextualize your question, and I didn't fully understand how it was supposed to be related, or I think you implied an inconsistency with my research on China. which I
Could I have the
personally
mic?
do not see. But thank you in any case for your question.
Now, maybe later on we can come back to that clip, because I want to point out the young man in the middle of the audience in red.
The guy who's
around.
looking back. Yeah. Oh, the guy who was looking back at the end.
That's a dear friend of a mutual friend of Daniel's and mine.
That's a way to say it.
But here's what I want to say about Zenz's answer. So I had a look at his book, and what I found particularly fascinating is our organization, the Citizens Party, since December, we've been distributing a dossier on how a big factor in what's happening in the Middle East and in Israel now is the Jewish messianic fundamentalism that has taken over a lot of the country, because Israel used to be considered more secular. And this messianic fundamentalism has taken over a lot of the country. And you've got a big faction of it in the government with Netanyahu. Netanyahu should have gone. Netanyahu would have, if he hadn't been able to form a government, he would have gone to jail because of the charges over him. So in desperation, he formed a government for the first time with these extremist messianic religious Jews who believe that we're in the end times. This is their overwhelming belief that we're in the end times. And their job is to rebuild Solomon's temple so that the Messiah can return. And what ever since they took power in December 2022, they started doing a series of provocations against the Muslims. So this is in a religious warfare kind of way, right? You got the religious Jews versus religious Muslims, and the fight is over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and a lot of these Jews talk about actually destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque so they can rebuild Solomon's temple. And when Hamas attacked on the 7th of October, Daniel, it called that attack the Al-Aqsa flood, and it was explicit that they were doing this because they were preempting what these extremist Israelis were trying to do, destroy the mosque. Now, that's not to cast judgment on the actual attack, but that was their stated reason for doing it. So you got religious people on both sides, and the danger here is it's turning into the worst kind of war, which is a religious war, because there's no actual. It's almost impossible to end a religious war. There's no negotiated peace. Both sides feel that they're doing God's work, right? Now, in his book, Adrian Zenz is crystal clear that he is one of the, because it's not just in Israel, it's not just the Jewish religious messianic fundamentalists that are pushing this. They are backed by 80 to 100 million Christian Zionists in the United States. Christians who believe we're in the end times as well, but it's Jesus is going to return. And in his book, Adrian Zenz maps out this whole scenario as well, that we're in the end times because the Jews have gone back to Israel. They formed the state of Israel in 1948. And he even references the specific attention on the temple that people have to prove, because he wrote a whole book which is the book that Max highlighted, to prove that we are in the end times. That's the way Adrian Zenz sees it. So he buys completely into this religious motivation for what's actually driving the conflict in Gaza, for what is actually responsible, in my view, largely responsible for the deaths of these 35,000 people. It's what sparked it all and set it all off. And whereas Netanyahu is under pressure from the Biden administration to actually, sometimes, the Biden administration is saying, look, cool it, right? This has gone too far. Right. Netanyahu, to save his butt in government, has to appease these extremists in his cabinet, like this guy Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are really extremists, and they're the ones backed by the Christian Zionists in America. And even a couple of weeks ago, there was a whole heap of pastors led by this rather notorious pastor Hagi, who flew to Washington on a Sunday after their church services to go to the Congress and say, you must support Israel to the hilt, right? We must not back away from our support for Israel one iota. That's what's driving this conflict. And Adrian Zenz proves in his book he's completely signed up to that belief system that's driving this conflict. So I would say he actually has a role, because of his belief system, in what has actually caused 35,000 deaths in Gaza and another 1,100 in Israel. He has a role in that. Yet he's blaming the Chinese government, which has caused no deaths in Xinjiang for genocide. I mean, it's that farcical, it's that ridiculous, but such is the nature of the world that we live in today.
Right. I want to make one small correction though, because you mentioned about it being a religious war and both sides believe in their, their cause or their God or whatever it is. I think that's definitely, there's a lot of evidence to support that for the Israel side. But I think no matter what religion the Palestinians are, and not all of them are Muslim, they would be fighting. And I don't, and I don't think it's,
I agree. No, 100% true. 100%. That's absolutely true, because it's their land that's been taken away, right? So they are the wronged party. But where the religious stuff comes in, it's where the beliefs, because they are so attuned to this, they know they're defending, Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. That's why they're going to defend it. And they see that they're aware of the triggers that are coming from the Israeli side, and they reacted to them. And that's not to, justify or whatever. We're not to approve of the killing of 1,100 Israelis on October 7th or anything like that. Though the same Max Blumenthal is the guy who's done a lot of excellent work in the last 6 months on how so much of what we were told happened on October 7th is the truth is very different from the narrative there. And it's worth, looking up the gray zone on that. The Israelis themselves are responsible for a lot of those deaths. But anyway, put that aside. While the rest of the world has focused on things like Islamic fundamentalism, you've had this Jewish fundamentalism rise up, get stronger and stronger in Israel. And the people who are paying the most attention are the Palestinians who are trying to defend their lives, but also trying to defend their holy sites, such as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And what's been a big part of Adrian Zenz's narrative about what China's done in Xinjiang? China's knocking down mosques and forcing the Muslim people there to abandon their religion or comply with, practice their religion in a way that pleases the state, but it, has actually raised a lot of mosques to the ground. Supposedly, this is a big part of the narrative. Yet the belief system he's part of, and one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is because, as I said, I grew up in this. That's why I've been talking about it a lot. I understand how I was raised a Christian Zionist. I understand how they think, and they've bought into a belief system that says we are in the end times, and everything that happens confirms that to them. And so take it from me, when someone thinks like that is the guy writing these supposed proofs about genocide in Xinjiang, he's not approaching it impartially or objectively based on evidence. What he calls evidence is very different to what you and I would call evidence. He sees the world very differently, and Max was right to raise that back in 2019. And I think it's even more relevant today, the fact that when he's complaining that no one's paying attention to his Xinjiang genocide narrative anymore because they're all worried, they're all tied up in Gaza. Boo-hoo.
Which is something he wants to see happen, which shows the hypocrisy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the hypocrisy in a second there too. But I think, for a lot of politicians in the U.S., although some of them, I think especially the Republicans, are probably extremely religious, I think it comes to, there's a little bit more complicated. I didn't prepare any slides for this, but I think it's well known how much the pro-Israel lobby through AIPAC funds these senators who then work on their behalf, where unbelievably ridiculous things are happening now. Like, there are certain ways that you cannot criticize the Israeli government anymore. Like if they have policies that resemble what was happening in Nazi Germany, you're not allowed to compare Israeli policy to Nazi policy. And so, I did a funny meme to illustrate how ridiculous this was with the famous North Korean defector. What's her name?
Yeonmi Park.
Yeonmi Park, that's it.
Park.
Where you put her picture up of her picture on Joe Rogan, and you say and you say the most ridiculous thing, like in North Korea you have to push the trains in the morning to get to work, whatever it is. But this, I put, in America you're allowed to criticize your own government, but if you criticize the Israeli government, you go to jail. And the thing is it sounds like something ridiculous enough for her to say, but that's actually turned into reality now.
And the thing is, America is that no country has a free speech legal basis like America, right? In the First Amendment. So this is one of those things that I think is, it's just ironic to me. I can't believe how stupid the establishment is and the Israel lobby is, because the more they're cracking down now to try and maintain their power, the more it is backfiring, and it's going to backfire. And our whole subject here is an example of another aspect of the backfiring, because they put so much effort into the Xinjiang thing, and now they've undermined it all by their attitude towards Palestinian Muslims in Gaza.
Yeah, and the sad thing is there's no real option for Americans. I mean, based on Trump's statements, it looks like he's going to be as pro-Zionist as Biden. Now, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past him if he was just saying what he had to say to get into power, and then what he actually does once he gets in power is different. Maybe that's my own wishful thinking. I think I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I remember him being at some sort of an AIPAC event, a long time ago during the first time he ran many years ago, where he says, there's a lot of people in here I don't like, I don't like you, but I need you, If I remember correctly, it was something to do with that. But
Trump's a professional panderer.
Yeah. And so many Democrats, even if they think Trump won't be any different, they're going to vote for him now. I've heard so many people saying they're going to vote for him because there needs to be consequences for Biden. And at the end of the day, the worst case scenario, Trump is going to be just as bad, but there's a bigger chance that he's going to throw a wrench into the system and just screw everything up. Well,
and that's why they voted for him in the first place. There's also this year, there's also going to be a bigger third party candidate than usually, or third candidate, which is RFK Jr. as well, who is a very mixed bag. And on Israel, the things he said, frankly, I think have been appalling. But on the total foreign policy picture, unlike most of them, he's definitely not appalling. And at the end of the day, a lot of people can have these opinions, but as the body count rises, and the breaking news, we're recording this on the 7th of May in the day. The breaking news overnight is that Hamas accepted a ceasefire, and the Israelis have turned around and says, "Oh, that's not what was on the table." And the Israelis seem to be determined to launch their attack on Rafah, which is the place where everyone had gone to get away from all the previous attacks. And now they're telling them, you got to go. They're telling the people in Rafah, refugees in Rafah, you got to go to Khan Yunis, except Khan Yunis doesn't exist anymore. And so if this next round of attacks happens, and Ben Gvir and these crazies in the Israeli government are demanding it, the body count is going to keep rising, right? And may have another big burst of that. In those circumstances, Daniel, more people are capable of changing their fixed opinions than you might think, right? Because how many children have to die before people go, okay, enough's enough? And we've never seen something like this. We put out on our show a couple of weeks ago, the official civilian death toll in Ukraine in 2 years, something like 13,000 people total, right? In 2 years of fierce fighting in Ukraine, which is much more evenly matched, versus just in 4 or 5 months at the time we did it, it was already 30,000 in Gaza. And so, yeah, people have opinions on something like Israel they probably always grew up with, and that shapes their opinions about politics. And, maybe RFK Jr. is one of those guys, maybe Trump's one of those guys as well. But as the death count keeps rising, do they stick to those opinions? And that's what we have to see.
It's amazing because there's so many people in America who are opposed to this, and you see all the students coming out. We're going to talk about how they're being painted also. You would think that you would just need a candidate who says, you know what, as soon as I'm elected president, all funding to Israel will stop. We're going to demand that they stop this massacre. But there's no real viable option for that. And you can see in the UK, you had George Galloway, who won because he was the only person who was critical of Israel. That's what people need right now. There are other candidates who had way more mainstream support, way better marketing or whatever it is than George. But that's one of the main reasons he won. But in America, nobody's willing to take that risk. They are more beholden to these kind of pro-Israeli requirements than they are to their own citizens. And so with that, I want to get into, because there's another thing too, is you know what's interesting in regards to this China comparison is what these senators were saying about student demonstrators in Hong Kong who and not students. I should say it's not students. They were actual rioters. There weren't the worst ones weren't actually students. They were rioters who were throwing Molotov cocktails at people, lit a man on fire, killed a street cleaner with a brick. A lot of people don't even know this. It's easily verifiable. But here you have, like, for example, senators saying, you know, it's unacceptable for the Hong Kong police force to require the arrest of all on-campus protesters, blah, blah, blah. Hong Kong authorities have turned a place of higher learning into a place of violence. You know, Hong Kong, the government police continue their assault on universities into the night. And actually, let's see here. So when you compare this to, you know, Josh Hawley, he's saying, expel, you know, for the peaceful protesters protesting genocide in Gaza, expel the students, fire the faculty, send the National Guard to protect Jewish students on campus. Now, honing on him, because Josh Hawley was very, very vocal about the Hong Kong protests.
Yes, very.
And you can kind of see, let's see here. He was the one who said the Hong Kong police trapping hundreds of students inside poly universities won't let them leave. Apparently, want mass arrests. Now, yeah, I don't have the. Let me see here. There's something really, really important about this because he specifically mentions Poly U, and I don't have the screenshot. But Poly U, they were actually manufacturing bombs inside.
I remember it. I remember it very well.
Confiscated. I can't remember how many thousands of Molotov cocktails, explosives, and all this stuff. And in that instance, Josh didn't want the police to go in. But when it comes to people protesting a genocide in Gaza, which is supported by the U.S., send in the National Guard immediately, arrest them all.
And was Poly U the one where there was an overpass over the road and the students were dropping things onto the cars and people on motorbikes on the road? Am I remembering that right? Because I was like that standoff at Poly U was very intense, and that, of course they're tweeting everything they're doing, these students, right? And they're not hiding that they're making Molotov cocktails. And
they've posted a video in their Telegram group of the video of them doing it.
Yeah, exactly. This was clear, and so for any intervention by the cops would have been a big deal.
I can't remember the one that there were quite a few universities that were taken over like that, but that might be the one, where they were dropping stuff into the highway below. And also they were shooting arrows off of it, and they shot one police officer in the leg with an arrow.
Whereas all that's happened on campuses in America, and they're copying it here as well, is the students have set up camps with tents on the campus grounds. They're being arrested for trespass on their own universities, right? I mean, like it's just a contrived arrest. And they've been accused, as the tweet said, of making the Jewish students feel unsafe. Yet, just in the last couple of days, there was this I think it was the UCLA. There was a group of there's a group, I forget its name offhand, but I think it's called the America-Israel Association or something. It was founded in the US, in the Israeli embassy. This is a front for the Israeli government, and young people representing that association were on the campus. They launched this attack on the encampment of the pro-Gaza protesters. So everyone knows that they initiated it. The police stood by and did nothing while this attack raged for hours until finally they stepped in and had to stop it. A lot of people were absolutely bloodied. And that's what Josh Hawley is calling for as legitimate to happen on American campuses. And the complete and he was saying the complete opposite about Hong Kong when they weren't even, you know, acting as students. They were actually acting as rioters. And our own friends at the Grey Zone, Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, who I must say, one of the things about the Grey Zone that is an inconvenience to the narrative is they're Jewish people. Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal are Jewish. And so they have been monitoring this closely and pointing out, and if you want, just follow the Grey Zone for this stuff. They have been pointing out where some of these anti-Palestinian groups on the campuses are just acting as provocateurs. They're going in there and they're yelling out, kill the Jews, because they want the media to take up, oh, there was chance to kill the Jews. But it's the Jewish side saying kill the Jews because they're trying to create a false narrative. And it's Max
and spray painting anti-Semitic things. So they've been caught multiple times. And it's amazing to see
the safety question against Jewish students is completely contrived. It's a fabricated.
They're literally slamming Jewish professors on the ground and arresting them, who are also standing in solidarity with Palestinians. There was one, the head of the Jewish Studies department. They slammed her on the ground, and her face was on the concrete. And so this is to protect Jewish students and faculty.
And get this, I tweeted at that video of her being slammed on the ground, and I just asked the question for my own benefit, because usually someone on Twitter can answer a question. Why is it the American cops seem to have to slam people on the ground to arrest them? Why don't you just get behind and put their hand behind their back and put the cuffs on? Why do you have to slam? Because every video you see now is people getting slammed on the ground to be arrested in whatever situation.
Right.
And the answer that came back to me was, this was specifically training a lot of the American police forces have received from where? Israel. Oh my God.
It's unbelievable. And the other thing you see happening too is the police are demasking the protesters in front of cameras, like very, very deliberately pulling their masks off, knowing that there's going to be consequences for them. Because I mean, there are a lot of pro-Israeli groups that in companies that potentially they might want to get a job in later. I don't know. But you didn't see this for these white supremacist groups when they were going around. You don't see them getting arrested in the same way, them getting demasked so everybody sees who they are. And when you look at, I don't know if you saw that picture I tweeted. I don't have it loaded up in the deck here, but the New York Police Department headquarters had basically a giant American flag and a giant Israeli flag there. And it's like, what the heck is going on? But yeah, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something? Because I want to go into how these students are being criticized.
I was just going to reference the Alan Dershowitz rant. If you saw that, Alan Dershowitz is the famous, Harvard law professor, etc. It was chilling the other day. Whoever posted it pointed out that his name is mentioned the second most number of times in the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he's skated by. Without, I mean, he's been, people have raised the question about why was he so close to Epstein, etc. Because, of course, Epstein was probably some form of intelligence agent. And then the question is who for? And in the short list, the Mossad has to be one of them, or the CIA, as well as the CIA, but not just them. Mossad has to be part of it. But anyway, Dershowitz is not a guy who's really credible, but he's this huge Harvard law professor, Alan Dershowitz, and he just had this rant against the students, and the whole thing was a threat, saying we're going to use lawfare against you, we're going to destroy your careers, and this is what the unmasking was about, right? So that these people who think like Alan Dershowitz can bring the full power of the law, which they're very significant in that domain, against these rather defenseless students. And as someone said, if they were postgrad students, at least they had a degree. They have a degree to fall back on that can't be taken away from it. But a lot of these students are undergrad students. They face being expelled from these universities, and this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. But see, America hasn't dealt with anything like this before, because the support for Israel has been an article of faith politically forever, really since the 50s. And now you've got a growing class of young people who are just reacting, I would say, at a humane level to what's going on and saying, how can this be justified? And this is the vehicle through which they're seeing through the hypocrisy of their own government's actions, and their own government can't handle it. And so what are they doing? How are they reacting? They're reacting just as they accuse any other country of that they say is a despotic regime of reacting. They're reacting in live, in broad daylight, right, in real time in front of our eyes, to show that they actually can't handle democracy. They can't handle free speech. They can't handle free thought, which is what they accuse other governments of, and why they should be overthrown by democracies. So it's quite extraordinary. And just before we go on, I just want to make a little disclaimer here, because this is a personal view of mine. Right. I'm actually starting to worry, Daniel, about genuine anti-Semitism.
Right. Oh yeah.
That is a blowback that the government of Israel and its supporters in America and Australia are causing themselves. The blowback to that can turn into runaway genuine anti-Semitism, and that would be terrible. But it's starting to happen, and people got to take a long, hard look at this and say
it's actually really disturbing to see how many outright, truly anti-Semitic remarks are starting to show up online. Yep. And it's because Israel wants to tie themselves to the entire Jewish experience and to all Jewish people. They want to say that any criticism of Israel and their policies is a criticism of Jewish people and it's anti-Semitic. So they're the ones who are trying to wrap all Jewish people up together in this, and there's going to be consequences for that. That's the true crime here, is what they're doing. It's amazing to see what's happening to these students too, because one of the things, when I have a history of kind of debunking anti-China propaganda, and the thing that people always say is, well, here we can protest, we can do all this stuff. Protests happen in China, actually, by the way, too. But they say we can criticize our government, we can protest. But what is that something to be proud of, that you can yell into the wind and nothing can actually happen? And now it's going even further. Not only can you just yell endlessly into the wind, now there's going to be serious consequences for you, as you can see with these campaigns to unmask them in front of the cameras. But to pull this back into the original topic of people who were very vocal and pretending to be concerned about a so-called genocide in Xinjiang, one of the other reasons I think this narrative has started to slip away is because it's become a very awkward situation for people who support what Israel is doing, but we're yelling about a genocide in Xinjiang. And for some reason, that's a lot of them. A lot of the people who are yelling about a genocide in Xinjiang now supports Israel. And I think they recognize, even though they're no stranger to hypocrisy, I think they realize how incredibly awkward it looks to still be talking about this genocide for which there's no evidence while they're actively supporting what's going on in Palestine. So I think you've heard some of those voices calm down a little bit. They'll probably rise back up after this, is all over, whenever that happens. But you do still see people trying to take a more passive approach to slowly try to redirect that conversation away from Gaza. And I'll show you an example of that with this person here, with Isaac. He says, can someone please do a reported piece asking the protesting students at Columbia and elsewhere what their views are on the genocide in Xinjiang and Beijing's role in the Middle East or globally? Do they see the Chinese Communist Party as a force for good? So, I mean, I knew exactly what he was doing. You'd love for people to, divert their attention away from the actual death and destruction of a people facilitated by their own government in favor of a genocide elsewhere that requires the use of your imagination. But this is happening a lot, showing this, but actually I also engaged with that in a way that even if you want to take his premise at face value, and even if you expected these students to believe that there was a genocide going on in Xinjiang, I think the correct answer would be, if Isaac really is expecting some of these students to believe in this so-called Uyghur genocide, a logical assumption would be that if their country was directly supplying China with munitions specifically used to carry out this genocide, it'd receive as much priority from them.
Exactly.
But not only are they not supporting this so-called genocide, they're sanctioning China because of it. So what do they want? The ultimate goal is to divert attention away from the conflict in Israel and say, please look at our imaginary genocide over here.
That's all it is. It's diversion. It's a propaganda ploy. And it's also a way to, because the protesters are young people, and I was a young person once, and now I'm a less young person. And in the intervening years, I've learned more. But that doesn't mean my passions as a young person were invalid. I got into politics because I was passionate about injustice, etc. But you don't know everything at 19 and 20 years of age. You learn as you go, and sometimes you say, oh, I was wrong about that. And then sometimes you say, oh, I now understand that slightly differently. I know more about that. I was right, but now I know more. I know more why I was right, etc. So you get these people who love nothing more than it's like picking wings off flies to say to these impassioned young people, ask them questions which are designed to undermine their confidence in their cause, right? So, oh, if you believe in this, then you must believe in this, then you must believe
gaslight
in
this.
Them, exactly. That's it. That's what it is. It's gaslighting, and they help feed the media with this kind of stuff, and these young people, well, I don't think it's going to work, frankly, at this time, because it depends on the particular cause. And like we said, if the cause in this case is driven by the undeniable mass murder of now 35,000 people, then that helps. That's where the students are getting their moral clarity from. So this is a feeble attempt, but that's what it is. It's a propaganda ploy.
Right. And actually, you have somebody in Australia who is almost a caricature, an extreme personification of what is going on in terms of these people who are screaming loudly about a supposed genocide in Xinjiang, and now suddenly coming out in defense of Zionists, and suddenly trying to, again, gaslight students. And the interesting thing about this little fella, who is Drew Pavlou. Did I say his name correctly? Is that how you, I don't know. It doesn't matter.
He's hard to forget.
Yeah, look at this. But actually, he started out a long time ago saying that, people need to be more critical of Israel, and all of this kind of stuff. This was him quite a while ago. But suddenly, when Israel actually started slaughtering people, he became somebody who spent most of his time not screaming about what was happening to the Palestinians in Gaza, which is all of the things that he wanted people to believe were happening to Uyghurs. Suddenly, he wants to gaslight students who are protesting genocide. Suddenly, he wants to come to the defense of Zionism.
All he's done in relation to Gaza is deflect. And what's significant about Drew, and I'll say to the audience, if you haven't seen the previous shows Daniel and I have done, go look at them, because Drew comes up a bit. And Drew was the young man in the video we played earlier in the red, turning around at the Adrian Zen's events. And in that article in the Grey Zone, when the Grey Zone wrote about that event, Max pointed out there was a young man in the audience who started screaming his head off, because Drew was 19 then. But he's had his shtick since he was 19 has been human rights. He's this enormous passion for human rights. He made a name for himself organising human rights protests on the University of Queensland in 2019, supporting the riots in Hong Kong because they were about human rights. And so, and the Uyghur, there's no bigger issue for him than the Uyghur genocide issue. It's about human rights, and that's why over the years he's often been people have often taken pot shots at him about how he's so passionate about the Uyghurs but says nothing about the Palestinians. So when this happened, when this current conflict burst out post October 7, Drew couldn't not say something, right? He's had to talk about this issue. And at first there was some, commentary, especially attacking Hamas, but then, he acknowledged that, he'll sort of have this sincere, he hates the death toll and whatever that's happening in Gaza. And what he also does, Daniel, is he reserves some criticism, the right to criticize these crazies I talked about, like Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu himself. So he levels some criticism at specific individuals in the Israeli government, right? But the rest of it is pure deflection. And it's all about deflecting people's attention off what's happening in Gaza to accuse them of anti-Semitism. They want to take away. They hate Israel's right to exist. All this kind of stuff. And it actually shows how his brand of human rights, very similar to the Washington-based Uyghur groups we talked about earlier, he defines human rights in exactly the same way. It's what America sees as human rights is what Drew gets fired up about.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think he just basically throws people, you know, a little bit of room, because it would be just too extremely awkward to just go full on pro-Israel. So he puts some superficial criticisms in place, but overwhelmingly he tries to gaslight people who are protesting this genocide. You know, it's the same thing. He did the same thing with the students too. You know, students are marching against Israel, and they only represent this much of our exports. Meanwhile, 30% of Australia's exports go to China. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, Australia's allies are actually supporting and arming Israel to commit this genocide, even if people wanted to believe what he was saying.
We arm Israel. We're in total lockstep with the United States. We almost always either abstain or vote against motions at the United Nations that affect Israel, except in the last couple of months. We've actually voted on anti-Israel motions in relation to supporting a two-state solution and things like that. But usually we don't do that. So we have actually been quite complicit in this thing for a long time as a country. And whereas, you know, what's the contrast? We have a trade relationship with China from which we benefit enormously. $270 billion in trade comes into Australia, $120 billion of that clear profit. That's our surplus with China. It supports our living standard. China, as we've developed this, has been raising its living standard, including the living standard of the Uyghurs. but Drew doesn't want to. Drew will never go there and find that out. He wants to wallow in his ignorance. But it's this. What we're criticizing him for now is this gaslighting of the student protesters, because it's funny to me. He's accusing them of the ignorance that I know is the reason he became a protester, right? I mean, I started taking pot shots at Drew Pavlou on Twitter in 2019 over the Hong Kong protests because everything that was coming out of his mouth was utter rubbish. And I knew that he was winning. The support he was getting was from xenophobic people who were whipped up to, frankly, be at least semi-racist, if not outright racist, hate the Chinese people. And Drew knew nothing, right? And now Drew is 5 years later is turning around and saying, "Oh, I'm so experienced and I'm such a wise. I've got such a wise head on my shoulders now with all my experiences." In fact, he even said in a recent interview, he says, "I regret some of the activism I did back in the day because he was always an agitating pain in the butt. Like he was a serial pest in the way he did his protests, especially the one in the election in 2022 at the Eastwood Mall where he held up a sign, Xi Jinping, F your mother, right, to the biggest Chinese population in Sydney, in front of
Chinese children who can read those characters and those profanities.
Yeah, exactly. As well. And I think that's the one that you and he ambushed in this interview that you were on at the time.
Oh yeah, the debate, the impromptu debate,
with Chris de Bruin. So he's now saying, he wishes he hadn't done that. So now the much older, wiser 25-year-old Drew is criticizing these people on the campuses who are passionate about trying to oppose genocide in Gaza, and he's got the important knowledge that they don't understand, and he's being a smart aleck going on there, being that guy trying to undermine their passion.
That's it. Yeah, you can see, for example, like where is it here? He's talking to the leaders of the Gaza camp and basically criticizing them for not knowing specific Zionists or Zionist philosophies, and saying that this basically discredits them from protesting against genocide in Palestine. Like, how desperate is that level of gaslighting? The interesting thing too is that I found out yesterday, I can't reveal my source, but you remember back when he did those campaigns when he wanted to get at the government He had two Uyghur friends. One of them was running also. They've stopped talking to him. They've actually stopped talking to him over his support for Israel. So I mean, it's pretty obvious.
I knew one of them had. I knew one of them had. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Apparently both. Apparently both. And I don't know. I mean, when this all blows over, I'm sure he's going to try to win back their support somehow. He's quite a manipulative person, but maybe they'll see through it, and there's no coming back from this. Yeah, no, I mean that's what it is happening.
That's the example I was talking about. That kind of, he goes onto the campus and goes, "Oh, you don't know enough. You don't know what I know. Therefore, he tweets that so people ridicule this student movement, as if, and he actually says what I did in 2019 was legitimate.
Yeah,
what they're doing now is illegitimate. Yet he would claim on paper he opposes the deaths of the people of Gaza, but he's using everything he can to undermine the cause that's trying to actually do something about it. And I know my own things about Drew Pavlou, such as the fact that his mentor is a right wing, a very hardcore, nasty right wing Zionist in Australia, a former politician named Michael Danby. I know he was Drew's mentor, is Drew's mentor. Every time I mention him on Twitter, Drew never responds. And Danby is a guy who in 1979 was named in the WikiLeaks cables. You can see the US Embassy cable from 1979 talking about how then the US Embassy was manipulating what was happening on campuses in Australia. And who was their guy on the Melbourne University campus? Michael Danby. So Drew's mentor had that role back then, being the US Embassy's point person on the campuses, on the Melbourne University campus.
This isn't the supposed lawyer he's working for, is it?
No, that lawyer is a guy who I'm not even. I don't know enough about what his particular motivations might be, but actually I do know that one of the reasons Drew is going around at the moment saying, "Oh, I wish I hadn't been so over the top in my protest when I was younger," is because he wants to be a lawyer, and there's a character test to be admitted to the bar, and he's tried to distance himself from his own activism so that he can actually get past that character test. So it's all cynical on his part, but this shows up the great human rights campaigner. He would tell you that his abiding passion is human rights. And in this interview he did the other day, he said the reason why is because ever since he was a teenager, he read all these books about the Holocaust and the things that were done to the Jewish people that must never happen again. And of course, I understand that. I had the same experience when I was a teenager, right?
And it's still true. I mean, that in itself is still true today. I mean, that's
exactly. Except he can't get. He literally, by his own actions, is acting like, well, that principle only applies to Jewish people. And whereas
that's the thing. Yeah,
Jews that's the thing. I mean, he's saying this is a Holocaust against another people. We should stop it.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming outright. Just defending Zionism, saying this is the only thing that Zionism is. No, it's not. I mean, all of what's happening is, and has happened over the decades, has happened under the guise of Zionism. And as a matter of fact, something from this, if I was in America, I could potentially go to jail for this. But I mean, that is essentially a Nazi belief, also creating an ethnic society for a specific ethnicity of people. And can you imagine the implications of that? If this is a truly valid thing, that, well, Zionists should be able to displace Palestinian people because they need a homeland for their ethnic people. Can you imagine suddenly if every single ethnic group in the world were able to build their own homeland using the same strategies and same procedures that Israel has? I mean, it would be a complete disaster.
Of course, where does it stop? So, and in fact, a Palestinian would observe that Drew's definition is wrong, because Zionism is literally the belief that Jews deserve someone else's homeland. Is the way a Palestinian would interpret that actual thing. No, it's there's no sincerity in it, and it is worth. That's the reason we're highlighting it, because this guy has been the big human rights, anti-China, agitator. It's all based on the importance of human rights, and this undeniable mass slaughter genocide that's going on in Gaza that nobody seems to be capable of stopping has exposed his true colors, along with the rest of his, American allies who have the same point of view.
Yeah, we actually skipped over a couple of videos that I had loaded up in the deck here, which is related to that too, in terms of the senators, with Tom Cotton, who was a very big supporter of the Hong Kong protesters, with the little Gaza. Did you want to show that clip?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Tom Cotton, like, this is a guy who, you're right, big. Well, you showed his tweet on Gaza,
yeah.
Right? This guy is particularly hardcore. This was as nasty as it gets.
Yeah, let's pull that up here.
We're here to discuss the little Gazas that have risen up on campuses across America, and the liberal college administrators and politicians who refuse to restore law and order and to protect other students. These little Gazas are disgusting cesspools of anti-Semitic hate, full of pro-Hamas sympathizers, fanatics, and freaks. The terrorist sympathizers in these little Gazas aren't peacefully protesting Israel's conduct of the war. They're violently and illegally demanding death for Israel, just like their ideological twins, the Ayatollahs in Iran.
Oh, man. I mean, next he'll pass a law saying Americans aren't allowed to go on university campuses and actually see what the protesters are saying. Because no one's saying death to Israel. In fact, as the grey zone exposed, the only people saying that are Jewish provocateurs who go in there trying to make it out that that's what they're saying. This guy, and I have a particular issue with Tom Cotton. We've got a couple of Tom Cottons in our parliament down here, who these ex-military types who've just got this programming from the, I don't know what it is, but they totally hate China. But Tom Cotton is the same guy who did probably the most explicit act of McCarthyism and that's saying something in the American Congress, because it's all McCarthyism nowadays. But Tom Cotton's the guy that put the CEO of TikTok on the mat, saying, "Are you now, or were you ever a member of the Chinese Communist Party?" And the CEO says, "Well, I'm Singaporean," but that doesn't matter. And then Tom Cotton went through this series of articles of faith that he was demanding the CEO of TikTok sign up to, one of which was, do you accept there was a Tiananmen Square massacre? And the big one was, do you accept the US government's designation that the Chinese government is committing genocide in Xinjiang? And when I saw Tom Cotton use those words, the Chinese government is committing genocide in Xinjiang, at the very time he and almost all his colleagues are doubling down on saying the murder of 15,000 kids in Gaza is Israel's right to defend itself, then I just saw red. That
was amazing. He seemed a little bit disappointed when the TikTok CEO didn't want to dispute his idea of what happened in 1989. The issue is if he has, if this TikTok CEO has looked at the issue itself and he says, you know what, this claim is absolutely BS. It's not the time and place to say that, because they would have used it as an aha, because everybody there is just going to say, "Oh, you see." So they put him in a really uncomfortable situation like that, because he wouldn't have had the time or he wouldn't have been given the opportunity to actually defend that. And if he was actually going to have to defend that, it would have taken too much time. But let's look at that. I have that in my deck here. Let's look at that exchange. I think a lot of people have already seen it, but it's worth watching again because it's quite spectacular.
You said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
Do you agree with the Trump administration and the Biden administration that the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator, I've said this before. I think it's really important that anyone who cares about this topic or any topic can freely express themselves on TikTok.
It's a very simple question that unites both parties in our country and governments around the world. Is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator, anyone, including, you can come into TikTok and talk about this topic.
I'm asking you,
or any topic that matters to you.
You are a worldly, cosmopolitan, well-educated man who's expressed many opinions on many topics. Is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Actually, Senator, I talk mainly about my company, and I'm here to talk about what TikTok does.
Yes or no? You're here to give testimony that's truthful and honest and complete.
Oh my God,
that's that's crazy.
You're inciting me, Daniel. So that if people know the reference to McCarthy, right? And in fact, I think is it Nuri? Someone, I think Nuri Vitaki might have just put up a good video where intersplicing McCarthy questions with current congressmen's answers and stuff like that. Anyway, Nuri does good stuff like that, and also Nuri's Friday Every Day blog has an excellent, just because we mentioned Tiananmen Square, has an excellent lengthy article on Tiananmen Square that I encourage people to go there and have a look at. But we didn't play that part of the clip. But McCarthy used to say, have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party? And it was for decades, it was seen as a black mark on American history. John F. Kennedy was criticized in the late 50s because he hadn't criticized McCarthy hard enough in the mid 50s. Right, people really turned against this and thought this was bad. There was a really famous scene where one of the witnesses back in the 50s said he finally sort of broke the spell of McCarthyism and said, "Have you no shame? You're asking these questions. Have you no shame?" And that exchange that people just saw, that is McCarthyism on steroids. He was channeling the spirit of Senator Joe McCarthy and asking those questions. And just like McCarthy, they don't know how dumb they are. I mean, the CEO says a million times, "I'm from Singapore," and he's still insisting because that's the nature of this, this all-powerful, mysterious entity called the Chinese Communist Party. You can be from Singapore, but you're probably a member of the Chinese Communist Party as well, right? They actually see a lot of this stuff in this sort of these crazy spiritual terms. But then, like I said earlier, to double down on the genocide question so emphatically when what's happening in Gaza was happening right then in real time in front of everyone's eyes. That shows you what you're up against with this crowd. It's just
they can't hear themselves. It's really remarkable. I think before we wrap this up and kind of talk about the moral of what we have seen unfold and how to kind of stay alert to it in the future, I want to finish. This doesn't really fit in, but it is Arslan Hidiat. I don't know if you saw the video. Actually, the way it does fit in is that some of these guys are going to get really, really desperate to get some sort of coverage about this fake genocide that's going on. Yeah. And Arslan is a guy who posted this video on his own timeline. I added the subtitles after so you can see what's happening, because he tried shouting over the woman so you couldn't hear what she was saying and what she was actually taking issue with, and kept saying that he was being attacked by a Chinese dragon. It's actually a lion, but it showed actually the opposite, how he was trying to instigate something for social media in a very racist way also.
Well, that's the thing that people need to understand. And before people make excuses for Arslan, understand who this guy is. He was an Australian-based Uyghur. So he basically has spent a lot of his life here in Australia. What we're about to see took place in Washington, D.C. But he made a name for himself by posting every ridiculous video he could find that featured Asian people in any possible context, and claiming it all showed Uyghur genocide in Xinjiang. And so Daniel, as usual, intrepid Daniel Dumbrell did an interview with him where he even admitted, I think you got him to admit that he knew
he did. Yeah, he admitted that that was BS. The kids crying in kindergarten, saying all kids cry in kindergartens, whether you're, you know.
But that was he posted it anyway, right? So that's who this guy is. But the reason I wanted to emphasize the Australian race thing is because, you know, like most Western countries, we're I mean, they use the word woke now. I hate woke. We used to say politically correct, but it was just this idea that things like racism were frowned on. There's certain ways to communicate nowadays. You don't talk in the way that you're about to hear this guy talk, right? Like if he'd come out of if he had a language problem, came out of, you know, whatever, I'd make more allowances for him. But no, this guy understands the rules of society, and the fact that he talks this way tells you something about him.
When you listen to this, tell me if because there was one word I couldn't understand what he was saying. I don't know if it's some Australian slang or something like that, but I heard him kept saying scabby. I don't know if he was saying scummy. Maybe it's the Australian accent. You listen to it and see if you can figure out what he's saying.
He says scabby. He says scabby. He's being really disgusting. Okay. He's describing her in a really disgusting way. Like it just means, you know, it's like literally scabs are when you get a sore and the blood congeals and, you know.
Wow. Okay.
That's what scabs are.
And this is somebody, obviously, when you listen to her, why she said she learned to do this as a skill and does it. It was exactly that, to keep herself off of the streets, as she was saying. And obviously she's had some sort of a tough lifestyle. And meanwhile, this is, well, you just watch the video. It's absolutely kind of sickening. Let's see.
Look at him. They couldn't even get enough Chinese people. I'm not being racist. Because we couldn't get what? They couldn't get enough. What are you trying to do? What do you think this is? Why you want to cause something? Are you trying to cause issue? Oh, your purpose is trying to. Look at this. Look at, she's trying to start shit. You're trying to start shit. Start shit now. You're trying to start shit. You're trying to start shit now. You're trying to start shit now. You're trying to start shit now. Look at this. Look at this. She's trying to start shit. It's a peaceful protest. They're trying to start shit. We're not going to be put into this game. Look at this. Look how scummy these are.
They brought a black person out here. I do this because...
Look at this scum. Look how scummy she is. Look how scummy she is. She's trying to start something physical. We've got peaceful protests, and they've got these dragons trying to start something. They're purposely trying to rile us up so we get into something physical. We're obviously not going to do that.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, he did. No. That guy. I came to a personal view with people like Arslan and Drew, who are buddies, by the way, that, you know, when they were younger, that they just might have been misled. But the more time's gone on, I don't think that. I think they're well and truly signed up members of the, you know, the hate China pro. Well, it's more the, you know, servants of US foreign policy school, frankly. And that's the overarching motivator. And so one of their jobs now is to undermine, you know, to deflect from what the truth of US foreign policy is on display in Gaza, and with trying to, you know, beat a dead horse over this Xinjiang fake narrative.
I think with Arslan, it's a little bit of a special case too, in that religious extremism does play a part in it. You know, I mean, he did say the other day, I think it was today or yesterday, he said on a response to people cheering out that they wanted Sharia law in the UK. He says, "What's wrong with that? Sharia law would be the best thing that could happen to the UK." And you know, and he's somebody on a podcast. I think the podcast was called The Good Muslim or something like that. He was talking about his desire to turn East Turkestan into a country, and he says, you know, there's really no true Muslim country on our planet. So again, a kind of like a Zionist-like philosophy, saying he wants to create this. Now, the funny thing is he actually does support the Palestinians, but in this case, he wants something similar to. For that in Xinjiang, and said that he, as I mentioned earlier, would ethnically cleanse Xinjiang of all of the non-Turkic ethnic minorities. So there's something special going on there with him. And he, with his first wife, he said he's always attaching himself to other people who supposedly have missing people in Xinjiang. And his first wife, he tweeted me and he says, "Oh, can you help find my father-in-law?" I looked him up on because he's a famous actor. I looked him up on TikTok, and he just released a video like a few days before of him filming a commercial for Lincoln Navigator or something like that. I said, "Yeah, sure. Here you go. Here's your father-in-law. Are you sure he just doesn't want to talk to you?" And he did reveal in an interview after with Carl Za that he actually was blocked by his father-in-law. So now he's divorced and he's remarried to a new overseas Uyghur in Washington, D.C., and he's looking for a new father-in-law again. Which is it's so contrived, but the ultimate goal is obviously a little bit more religious in purpose for him. But what he did there to that woman, she did not deserve that. It was absolutely disgusting, but it's going to tie into a desperation that you're going to see for people who want to reboot this narrative, because it has been lost. It's not to say that it won't come back again, but for the time being, they're panicking.
Well, the American government's put an enormous amount of money into this narrative, including I think it was $500 million a year for 3 years or something like that, to train journalists, to influence the media into this whole narrative. And suddenly, because of what's happening in Gaza, everything's derailed, right? So the whole edifice of American and British propaganda on this is going to be completely desperate and want to bring it back on track. So we've covered the signs that they're complaining that it's fizzled out, and they're not happy with the state of play. But yeah, we do need to warn people: be prepared for this to come back with a vengeance. The only caveat being that also understand when it does come back that this is a phenomenon in that 15% of the world's population that are in Western countries that Kishore Mahbubani talks about. It looms large inside our countries. I'm very confident, Daniel, the rest of the world is not buying this stuff. 50 plus Muslim countries have openly endorsed China's policy in Xinjiang. And I think that the Palestinians, in whatever form, have also been some of the latest there was some Palestinian delegation to go there. And then, of course, recently, just in the last, I think it was last week, the Chinese hosted a meeting between the Fatah, which is the old Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Hamas, because they are opposing movements. The Chinese hosted a meeting between those two groups to try and find some common ground so you can get some unity in the Palestinian cause. This is actually the Chinese trying to help out a Muslim people, right? Going out of their way to use their diplomatic clout, etc., to help them out. And people like Arslan and Drew and the US government would like us to think that China, how many times did Drew Pavlou tweet something, some latest claim about what's happened to some Uyghur in China, saying this Uyghur has gone to prison simply because he's a Muslim, right? Yeah. And the whole thing was always just... Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it really flies in the face of what Tom Cotton was saying during that interrogation also, where he says this is what unites all the other countries with the United States. No, it doesn't. And for a lot of these Muslim countries, the reason is because they've seen a lot of this extremist propaganda before. The exact same narratives about forced sterilization, forced labor, destruction of mosques. They've even accused Egypt of doing it when they wanted to separate a part of Egypt into a caliphate also. And then you can only, because the other mistake they made, and Arslan did this too, is they tied in other Muslim countries into the narrative also. They said Saudi Arabia was sending people to Xinjiang to get halal organs that were forcefully harvested from Uyghurs. I mean, so when you pull Saudi Arabia into it and you're like, what are you talking about? This wouldn't be haram. This is halal, us taking organs forcefully from someone else. Like, I mean, when it got really nutty like that, you started, this is okay with God, it just got to a point where other people could see through it. But you're right. This is something that is, of course, they're going to try. They've invested so much money up until now. They're not just going to let this die away. It might be a little period of time now where it's a little bit too awkward for them to push too hard, but it's going to come back, and people have to keep their eyes open to the fact that the genocide that you could see unfolding with live videos and images in front of your eyes is something that the U.S. wanted you to calm down about. And meanwhile, this genocide in Xinjiang, which in order for you to believe, you have to read endless reports that manipulate data or, you know, tell stories that the U.S. is funding millions and millions of dollars into, is a little bit suspicious, not only because there's not any evidence, but because, you know, well, actually, the U.S. doesn't actually care about these kinds of human rights abuses, because we saw what happened when they actually do happen, even in an even more extreme way than they're claiming is happening in Xinjiang. But I don't know if you want to add any final words on this too, about people needing to stay alert to this, because it's not only the Xinjiang narrative. Also, it's a matter of looking for future narratives which are targeted at somewhere else or another set of people, which have all the same markers on it. You've got to be alert to this kind of stuff.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons that when a lot of these China claims came along, I saw through them straight away, because my experience had been with all the previous claims. You know, Libya in 2011, right? You know, that we have a responsibility to protect. Gaddafi's going to commit a massacre in Benghazi, you know, and they went in and they destroyed one of the most advanced countries in Africa, and happily so. And you know, Hillary Clinton said, "We came, we saw, he died." You know, that sort of stuff, right? But then, of course, the big one, which I still regard as the war crime of the 21st century, is the invasion of Iraq. And even though I was always on this side of things in politics, you described 2019 as your awakening moment. My awakening moment was the thing that awoken in me in 2003 is, I remember we fought really hard against the Iraq invasion, and you know, a lot of people did. The biggest anti-war protests in the history of the world happened in the lead up to that invasion, and we didn't stop it. But the other thing I was conscious of afterwards is when we didn't know at the time that Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction. We knew they hadn't proven he had weapons of mass destruction, but we didn't know he didn't, because those of us who are arguing against it, we're not arguing from the standpoint of understanding that this was literally made up, right? We assumed there must be some sincerity to the fear, right? And we were saying, no, you haven't proven that. And you know, people like the weapons inspectors, like, you know, Scott Ritter's a very powerful voice nowadays, anti-war voice, and he was one of the weapons inspectors saying that's not there. Afterwards, you realize, hang on, they literally made this up. That they made up a lie that allowed them to start a war that's killed 1 million people. They made it up. And from that moment on, my attitude has been, you make a claim, you better be able to prove it. None of this, any, you know, rubbish anymore. Like the CIA director Brennan said in answer to some question in Congress once, where he said, "I deal in intelligence, not evidence." No. I want evidence. I want court level evidence. If you're going to tell me there's genocide in Xinjiang, give me the evidence, because you people who are making these claims, you're the ones who want to go to war on the basis of these claims, and those wars are, you know, genocidal. They are calamitous. They annihilate millions of people, right? No more do you have no credibility anymore. You must prove your claims. That's been my attitude ever since 2003. And of course, the only little bit of empathy actually I have with the Israelis is they've actually said this. I've seen a number of statements about it. They say, why are we being accused of genocide in Gaza when it's not that much different to what the Americans did in Fallujah? And go look at it. They're right. It isn't much different, right?
When you got to bring yourself to that standard, though, that's your comparison. Like,
well, exactly. But that tells you how effective the American propaganda was over those years, you know, and they sort of got away with that. Now that it's just because we're Jewish. No, both were awful crimes, and the world is still paying the price for those awful crimes. And by the way, Netanyahu was complicit in the first crime as well. So to me, that's what people have to understand, that this is the nature of the war machine. They're going to lie to get their wars, and we have to call out the lies and demand real evidence for the lies. And one final thought. And I think this is, you know, I expressed concern before about, you know, we will see anti-Semitism on the rise because of this, and that's a terrible outcome. The other concern I want people to reflect on, Daniel, is that I mean, every Muslim in the world has got a clear message in the last 6 months that Muslim lives don't matter. That's the message from Gaza, right? Those lives don't matter. They're secondary. The Americans would not tolerate this happening in any other place, especially any white country or whatever, right? All the hand wringing over Ukraine, for instance, when I told you the civilian casualties are so much lower compared to what's happening in Gaza. This is a terrible message to the Muslim population, and it's going to spark extremism on the other side. And in fact, there's been a couple of incidents in Australia in the last few weeks about this involving knife attacks, etc., by young Muslims. And there was a counter-terrorism expert on the news last night. And what impressed me is she actually acknowledged this part of it. She says you cannot separate these incidences from the context of what's in the news at the moment, right? And that is a real blight as well. And that's why we have to, we have to think about the really big picture and the consequences of these things happening when we look at a situation like Gaza and realize, well, these are the reasons we have to stop it. Right, because if we truly believe in human rights, if we truly believe in equality of all people, if we truly believe in peace, we have to call out this stuff and do our best to stop it. That's what we're trying to do.
Right, and to see what is happening in real time also, because I think what's going to happen is when there is a genuine spike in anti-Semitism, they're going to want to try to erase the context of how that happened. Yeah, so we have to see it happening in real time, that Israel is roping all Jewish people in together with their crime and their war machine for this to happen. And it kind of, and so it's not only a matter of manufacturing narratives, it's also about leaving out context. Because like I said, that context is going to be erased. Because I should say, actually, an earlier awakening moment, not to the point where it pushed me to actually make content, was I remember, of course, everybody remembers who were old enough at the time where they were when they heard that 9/11 was happening. I remember it was in my office and everything like that, and I was on board with like my cousins who work in the World Trade Center. They didn't go to work that day, luckily. I remember trying to call them, and it was impossible to reach them because all the phone lines were jammed. Everybody was trying to call their family in New York.
Yeah, right.
And I remember thinking, being filled with rage also, like this is somebody needs to pay for this. And kind of just falling into the whole narrative thing. But I remember when I saw Ron Paul in a debate against Rudy Giuliani, and he was saying, we need to ask the question, why were we attacked? We weren't attacked just because they hate freedom. They don't want us to be free. That's right. They're doing this because we're over there. We're doing all this. And he got shut down by the audience, by the host, by everybody. Everybody started booing him. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second. I want to hear more. Let's explore that question. Like, why is that an unreasonable question? But of course, people will try to boil it down to some sort of a basic thing. No, you shouldn't ask questions like that. That's like saying we deserved it or we asked. No, it's not. Let's see, how did this actually happen? And so the same thing with wanting to sell a one-dimensional story on the tragic war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Also, they want to erase it of any context of how this happened. It's really important to reconcile that as well too, because there is a potential, if the U.S. gets desperate, that they might want to provoke something between mainland China and Taiwan, and I think that would be very easy for them to accomplish. And
they hate us. The narrative is they hate us for our freedoms. The Hamas hates Israel, attacked Israel just because they're Jewish. Russia attacked Ukraine because Russia just wants to conquer Europe. And if China, if there's a war over Taiwan, that's just China aggression to try and take over the world. It's a totally simplistic narrative. They want people to think in those simplistic terms, and we better start seeing through it, or else the next one. And if it is ever a war with China, that's the big one, and then may as well last one out, turn out the lights.
Yeah, seriously. No, I think that's a good note to end on, to kind of remind people to stay aware and alert to narratives that don't make sense because there's insufficient evidence, narratives that are stripped of context, and narratives where they're trying really hard to funnel you through a very narrow door in terms of what to accept. But yeah, no, thanks very much for joining, Robbie. And we've got a few other topics. I mean, what we might want to talk about soon.
We do. We'll do a show pretty soon, actually. There's a case in Australia that people need to know about. There's a man who's been in prison for nearly 2 years now in solitary confinement, and he's an American turned Australian citizen who was a Marine pilot, and he's being scapegoated by the people who want a war with China, and there's a fight over his extradition to the United States on totally trumped up charges. So we'll do a show on that so people understand that. Because if you might think this is not you might be thinking this is sort of all normal, or not normal, but like these are sort of background tensions or whatever. But if you're ever a victim of it, if this guy dropped his kids off at school and the federal police pounced on him and he's been in prison ever since for nearly 2 years now, and we'll talk about the power the US government's bringing to bear in this case, etc. It's really, really shocking, and we need to expose it because the people who are behind it are desperate to get this bloody conflict escalated.
All right. So everybody can stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time, Robbie.
Thanks, Daniel.